Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Tyrone back with Tech Life. Great article here from Globe Newswire. I'll leave a link to it in the description so you guys can check it out. So Verizon Frontline Crisis Response Team introduces two new deployable assets. So this is incredible, right? Verizon continues to innovate, develop specifically for frontline crisis response teams. So from a experience perspective, looking at experience, Verizon as a company has the most and longest experience with first responders and any crisis team, right? Before FirstNet, AT&T wasn't doing a lot with first responders. T-Mobile wasn't competing there well. Sprint did not compete very well with first responders. It was like 80-90% of first responders were sitting with Verizon. And that's individuals, agencies, you name it, crisis response, whatever. They were with Verizon. So Verizon has been serving these customers for a very long time. Now Verizon they're experiencing competition, right? Now AT&T got the FirstNet contract, and if I had to take a guess, Verizon right at this moment is probably regretting not competing more aggressively on that contract. But with that contract, AT&T got 700 pretty much handed to them through the contract, right? They got 700 band 14 or N14 in the future, and they were given a reimbursement to deploy that on all their sites. And that spectrum was meant for dedicated bandwidth for first responders in events of emergency. So if there's a big emergency, all consumer traffic is immediately kicked off of that band, and it's empty and only usable for first responders in that instant. That's what it originally was meant for, and still is meant for today. But if there's no ongoing emergency, it's just like any other band. It's consumer, first responders, anybody has access to that spectrum. So now AT&T with FirstNet, through the vote of the FCC, they got 4.9 handed to them on a silver platter. So that was free spectrum. They did not have to compete for it. They did not have to put any auction bids in for it, nothing. They got it handed to them on a silver platter, and they're going to get government dollars on a reimbursement basis to deploy that spectrum. So it's like a double win for AT&T. So Verizon is facing that competition. Now, T-Mobile is getting going with what I said in the video earlier, with what still should be a commercial launch this year, T-Priority. That is the branding that they're going with after first responders, right? AT&T has FirstNet. FirstNet is their branding for first responders. Verizon, it's Verizon Frontline, and T-Mobile, it's T-Priority. So Verizon is facing competition from T-Mobile as well, right? T-Mobile now has the standalone 5G core widely deployed for both low band and mid band. So now they can offer priority slicing, dedicated slicing. They can offer advanced network solutions now for first responders. They have preemption and QCI now built into that new 5G core, which is what T-Mobile calls state-of-the-art technology. So Verizon is feeling that competition too. And T-Mobile still today likes to undercut on price in the bidding. So that's something that Verizon has to keep an eye out on too. I know AT&T stood their ground and they said they're not undercutting T-Mobile, right, when it came to that VA contract. Verizon would likely say the same for a few first responder agencies, like, hey, we're not going to undercut. That's too low. But eventually, as time goes on, if they lose more and more first responder agencies as T-Mobile ramps up competition, gets more aggressive, they're going to have to match or undercut what T-Mobile's doing. If their solutions and everything that they're deploying today, if it's effective enough, and they start taking agencies and first responders and Chicago PD, NYPD, LAPD, whatever, right? Just throwing out some examples. They're going to have to start monitoring that. They're going to have to start saying, hey, guys, look, we have to go back to the drawing board. We've never faced this type of competition from both sides. Now we have to really step back, and we have to compete now. We have to compete now too. And a good way to do that as well is to deploy these types of assets and introduce new deployable assets that your competition might not have access to today. It's very possible. But T-Mobile has their 5G core widely deployed, which they're calling state of the art. So now they have that preemption service. They have QCI. They can prioritize. They can network slice. They have a ton of bandwidth out there at scale, even in the rural environments, as you guys saw yesterday in California. There's 11 rural county parks or fairgrounds that T-Mobile deployed 5G assets for first responders. So it's going to get a lot tougher for Verizon moving forward. It's not going to be as easy as it once was. During LTE, they just sat at the table. I'm big Verizon. Here's my LTE network. You have no other option. And boom, Verizon was getting them all. Boom, 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 boom. Remember, early on, during LTE, T-Mobile had no confidence or assets to compete. Yes, they had spectrum, but they knew very well they had no backup gens deployed at that time, or very, very few, maybe 1% of sites had backup generators. They had no QCI built into the LTE core at that time. They didn't have scaled fiber at the time. They had no low band that held them back too for indoor coverage. They had no low band. They were struggling with the calling, right? VoLTE launch. They were struggling with that. So they weren't going after first responder agencies. They were simply not doing it. Just like they weren't going after bigger enterprise business accounts. They were simply not even trying to compete there. They got some small business accounts, and they were happy with that during that time. And they knew their network was not ready for that type of service. They could not deploy private networking at that time, advanced network solutions. T-Mobile at that time could not deploy any of that. It was a lack of funding overall, not just from a CapEx perspective, but OpEx, everything. They just couldn't do it. Now, T-Mobile is doing advanced network solutions. They can do private networking. They can do hybrid solutions. They have that too. They're serving government accounts with the FWA, and maybe they can do that too with like fire stations. They could serve them with FWA, very possible. So competition, it's at its highest level it's ever been, and Verizon is going to have to continue to push and innovate moving forward in this space to, for one, retain the agencies they have today, and to fight back. They're going to have to fight back. Like I said, AT&T recently was just handed 50 megahertz of 4.9 on a silver platter, although I'm hearing some engineers and stuff are not too excited about 4.9 because it presents some interference with Wi-Fi perhaps. So I'm looking into that. So there might be reduced power and range from sites. We'll see. But AT&T today, their network does not support the densification necessary for 4.9. It's a higher frequency versus C-band. And you have to have a tight grid to support that type of frequency, which they don't have today. So they're going to have to deploy additional infrastructure assets, right? Small cells, towers, to tighten that grid. They're going to have to do it if they want that to be a successful contiguous layer of bandwidth. So Verizon may not have had much interest in the spectrum. I know they sent a letter to the FCC. They were against what ended up happening, right? But I think that was more of a point that they wanted to make, that nobody should just be given spectrum, right? Do they see 4.9 as attractive? I'm going to ask some people behind the scenes. We'll see. But for now, Verizon Frontline, this is incredible. They're deploying new deployable assets, and we'll see how they ramp this up. But they're going to have to be on their toes, and they're going to have to compete now because they're taking it from both sides, right? They're being competed from T-Mobile, FirstNet, and Dish. If they get off the ground, that'll be another competitor too, because they're doing 5G advanced network solutions as well, and 5G private networking too. So So let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe if you're new. Follow my social media outlets. This is Tyrone with Tech Live. See y'all in the next one. Peace.